What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Guys, before we kick off, I just want a quick message from our sponsor, me. Yes, that's right, my 12-month property investment mentorship program, the Accelerator, that is kicking off again. We're actually opening up and we're allowing new members to join. So please do consider jumping in. It's got the mentoring and coaching. It's got the systems and strategies for busy professionals and business owners who are looking to build a portfolio that is capable of generating sufficient passive income for them to be able to basically take their foot off the gas and ease back a little bit. Like, you might love what you do, but will you have the same energy, enthusiasm for what you do, say 5 or 10, 15 years from now? The idea is just to give you options. And so that's what the principle of the course is all about, the program. And there's also an element of accountability and networking, community and stuff like that. So guys, if that sounds of interest to you, please go to the show notes and have a look for the discovery call. And just book yourself in for a call with me to discuss the program. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And this week I am going to be talking about HMOs, and I'm going to be talking about specifically HMOs here in Ireland. And there's quite a lot to cover, so this might actually be broken up into part 1 and part 2. Before I want to get into that, though, I was just going to talk about a headline that I saw today, and the German residential fund called Vonovia. The CEO is a guy called Rolf Buch, I think it is. That's how you pronounce. But he's actually warning of a collapse of a number of these funds. And now this Vonovia is an absolutely massive fund. It has over 500,000 apartments in Germany. And so they'll give you an idea, like that is probably one company that owns possibly more properties than the entire country of Ireland. But he is warning that the fact that the interest rates rose in the last few years, that there's going to be a lot of funds and property businesses that have got properties on their books that were valued based on those historically low interest rates. And his warning is that now that the rates are higher, that those valuations are going to start coming down, and it could trigger a whole wave of bankruptcies. It'll be interesting to see whether that plays out. I guess time is going to tell, but it is interesting. Another bit of news I just want to tell you about is the school group that I have, the free community. We're up to nearly 400 people there. And now that we have about 400, I've been thinking, how can I add some value into that group? And so what I'm going to be starting next week is a live Q&A where anybody in the school group can basically ask a question and get an answer. And so that will be, now obviously there's a lot of people in the group at 400, and so will you get, will I be answer everyone's question? We'll have to wait and see. But I just want to give you a little bit of notice about that. If you're not in the school group, please go to the show notes below and have a look and just join the group. It's completely free. And once you're in there, you'll be notified of these various calls that I do. Now, the final thing I want to do in terms of news and stuff is just resilience. So you guys have heard my story. I've talked about the ups and downs of my career. I've talked about the roller coaster that took place in 2008 when the collapse of the market and all that kind of stuff. And so I've seen my share of the ups and downs, and I'm working on a book that's going to contain all of my war stories and wisdom. That's what the tagline. And there's going to be, it's going to be about how to become a resilient investor, how to best protect yourself, how to have the mindset of a resilient investor so that you can weather these kind of ups and downs. Now, hopefully you won't suffer the same ups and downs that I did because of the wisdom that I'm going to share in it. I'm going to make sure that people are aware of the mistakes that I made and how to avoid them. But I'm also going to be building in a whole section on recovering from having a major setback in your life. And for a lot of people that I know, and I've been sharing this in my Instagram recently, and getting a lot of people writing to me saying, went through something similar, really painful, all that. So you're not alone if you're going through this. And so what I want to do is create some content that will help you, get your mind in the right place and help you kind of come back from where you might be. A lot of people, they suffer those downturns, and they have scars as a result of it. And those scars can often leave you with very limiting self-beliefs. And if you have limiting self-beliefs or self-limiting beliefs, it can hold you back, and it can prevent you from taking action to kind of move forward. And the reality is that the past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. All that exists is right now, today. Everything else, like if it's a memory, that's all it is. It's not a fact. It's just a memory. And it's really, what you do today with the time that you have allotted today is what matters, not what happened in the past. And those are some of the things that I'm going to be sharing in that book. So if this sounds of interest to you, please reach out to me. Let me know. Those of you who actually reach out and let me know that you'd be interested in this, I will put aside a signed copy of the book for you. And let's get into the episode, shall we? So there's a lot of people asking about HMO, the HMO investment model, and specifically in the context of the Irish market, because there's not a lot of talk about it. And if you are based in the UK and if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to be scratching your head wondering, why is he talking about HMO? Sure, isn't that here for the last couple of years? HMO is very, very common in the UK, but in Ireland, it is not a common investment model. And we have something that could be kind of construed as something similar to HMO, and that would be like the pre-63. And those are the old houses that you might have in Rathmines and along the canals of Dublin, where they're split up into multiple apartments and stuff like that. But a HMO model is a very specific model. I'm going to go into that today because there's a lot of people starting to explore this, and it seems like kind of a lucrative avenue for people that are looking at investing in the Irish market. And listening to the different guys that are in my mastermind, a lot of them are very frustrated at just the prices at the moment. They're finding it very hard to find value in the market. And the only way, if you're in that situation where you're finding it, struggling to make a deal make sense on paper, then you have to start looking at what are the alternative uses. And so instead of it being a traditional buy-to-let, maybe have a look at the HMO model. There's nothing at the moment preventing you from converting a property into a HMO in Ireland at the moment. In the UK, it's been a common investment model for many, many years, but it is now regulated in the UK. So anyone who's in the UK looking at this will know that you're not allowed to do it without permission in advance and all this kind of stuff. But here in Ireland, it's completely unregulated. And so let's begin with, what does HMO mean, first of all? I'm going to be talking about what is a HMO, and I'm going to just talk about how a HMO works. So the acronym HMO stands for House of Multiple Occupancy. It's not to be mistaken with the other HMO, which if you do a Google search on what HMO means, it might say Health Maintenance Organisation, which is one of these kind of organisations that look after healthcare and stuff like that. In this case, it's about houses that have been broken up into rooms as opposed to renting the entire house. You rent the room. And that is what HMO, House of Multiple Occupancy. So in its simplest form, you take your average house that instead of renting it out as a single occupant like a family, you break the house up into the bedrooms and you rent them out on a bedroom by bedroom basis. And then you will share the common areas. So things like the kitchen, the bathrooms, those kind of areas, those are common. Now, a lot of people will say, sharing bathrooms? No way. There is, a lot of HMOs that will have ensuite bathrooms that are actually in your room, so you don't have that issue. But there will be ones where there just isn't the space there, and so it has to be shared bathrooms and stuff like that. And of course, the price will adjust accordingly. So how does this differ from, say, a bunch of people sharing a flat? You see, this is how it differs. It's quite different. Is you can go out there and you and a bunch of friends can say, let's go and rent this person's house. And say you're going to college and you have 4 friends in college, and you and the 4 others, the 5 of you, decide to go and rent a 5-bedroom house from a landlord. And the landlord says, that's no problem. I'll rent to you, Gavin, but you can have your 4 friends living in the house if you want. And they'll go and share the bills and things like that. That is all fine. The thing is for the landlord is renting to a bunch of people, but those people are all kind of working together and sharing and looking after all of that stuff themselves. He, as far as the landlord is concerned, he's collecting one monthly amount from, we'll say, Gavin, and then it's Gavin's responsibility to collect the rent from the other 4 people that he's moved in with. And so the individuals will have to come up with the shortfall themselves. If I go up to the landlord and say, listen, sorry, I don't have the rent this month because 3 of the lads didn't pay me, then I'm going to be turfed out of the house because it's my fault. I have to come up with a shortfall. Now, with the HMO, it's different because you're renting out each bedroom as an individual unit, and the person who rents it is responsible only for that room. And so it's nothing else. So a person comes along, and instead of having to rent a house, we'll say a 5-bedroom house might cost 3,000, split between 5 people. It's a couple of hundred each, or whatever. You split the bills down the middle. And but if you go and if a landlord does this, then it'll just be me going to the landlord saying, I'll take that room and I'll pay you your 750 or whatever it might be a month. And that's how it works. And so it's the landlord's job to fill the empty rooms, not the individuals. And that's the difference between, we'll say, a flat or a house that's been shared versus a HMO. Now, this is good for the tenant's rights in a sense, because the tenant only has to worry about paying the bill on his specific room. He doesn't have to worry about the other people. If somebody's not paying the bill, nothing to do with me. I'm just looking after myself. But it's also good for the landlord because on a split basis, you actually earn more. So if you go out there and have a look in the area that you live at the prices of, we'll say, a house, a 4-bedroom house, what does it rent for on a monthly basis? If you go and take that very same house and split it into 5 bedrooms, each bedroom collecting its own rent, you will get more for that individual bedroom. If you take the 5 bedrooms and add up the price that you get for each one, it'll be substantially more than you'd get for the house as a whole. And in my case, there's, I know a couple of guys in the program, in the mastermind, they are doing this. And you'd be amazed the difference. Like, instead of collecting, say, 1,800 a month from a family for a 3-bed, that landlord may be able to get 800 per room. And so he'd be able to collect maybe 2,400. But what people will also do is extend the house out the rear and things like that. And so guys that have, we'll say, a little bit of construction knowledge and stuff, they can go and do this. And the downstairs living room gets converted into a bedroom as well. You'll go and put in an ensuite down there, and then maybe you'll extend out a little bit into the rear garden as well. So instead of having, we'll say, a 3-bed, all of a sudden you might have a 5 or a 6-bed, and a 5 or a 6-bed collecting 800 a month. Suddenly, do the maths, like it's an awful lot more. And so you could be bringing in 3,200 a month instead of the 1,800 you were getting for just the house on its own. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, the guys that are extending out the rear and they're going out there and they're finding contractors, and the contractors are trying to, we'll say a contractor has won a job as a subcontractor for, say, a big project out in Leixlip or something, working on maybe the Intel development. And those contractors are desperate to bring in workers from, say, the Eastern Europe that have skills, but they just cannot find accommodation for them. And so suddenly they're putting them into a house, and you're looking at contractors paying, 4, 5, 6,000 a month for a house and taking on all the bills and stuff like that. So it's very, very valuable way of going about it. And it's also potentially helping us sort the housing crisis, because you've got a house that can now accommodate 5 or 6 people instead of it just being a small family. Now, of course, families need houses too. So this isn't going to work across the board. A lot of the time, these houses that are being split into this way, they're in a very specific format. And you're not going to be bringing in a HMO in a street that has no parking, for example, because a lot of the time you're going to have multiple people arriving by car. And so if they're all arriving by car to park outside one house that only has one car parking space, it's not going to work. So you have to think about all this. There's a whole process that goes into figuring out whether or not this can work. And obviously, if you're renting out a HMO on an individual basis and you're finding 6 or 7 individuals, and you're trying to get them all to move in together, one of the issues you can have is in interpersonal relationships. And I've seen this happen before, where you'll have some guy that's antisocial, or you'll have a guy that maybe goes out and has a few drinks by himself and comes home a bit kind of rowdy. And that can actually push the other guys that are, not creating those problems out of the house. And so you can end up with a problem, at least in the case of renting to, say, one corporate, we'll say sub-tenant, or we'll say master tenant, and then he rents out to the guys that work for him. The good thing about that is that they're going to keep control over it. And so it doesn't become your problem, it becomes their problem. Now, obviously, there's a lot more intensification in terms of the use of the property. So wear and tear is going to be higher. And you do have to think about that. And so there's going to be things like appliances, like the cooker, the fridge, freezer, the washing machine, all of that kind of stuff is getting heavily used by multiple people. And so what I've seen done in some of the bigger projects by some of my clients is that they'll put in 2 of each. And so they'll have there'll be 2 fridges, there'll be 2 washing machines, 2 tumble dryers, 2 cookers, so that you'll never have a situation where you come down to go and cook some food and it's already been hogged by somebody else, and you get kind of fed up waiting around. At least if you have multiple machines like that, you can kind of get rid of the frustration, but also reduce the wear and tear. Now, is it a good investment? This is one of the things that you have to be careful about. A lot of people, when they think about, if you're able to double the rent on your property, does that mean that the value of the property has doubled? In the case of commercial property, a lot of the time it does. But in the case of residential property, it does not. And this is one of the small nuances. This is probably the biggest reason why I prefer commercial property over residential property, is because if you can double the value of the rental income, you've effectively doubled the value of the property. Whereas if I double the residential property value or the rental income from the property, it does not translate into a doubling of the value of the residential. And that is just a component of the way the valuation system works here. Typically, the banks will send out a valuer, and the valuer will apply. There's a thing called the red book, and this is a valuation method. And a lot of the time, there's various rules and regulations as to how this is carried out. But when it comes to residential property, typically what they'll do is they'll look at the highest price achieved on the open market by a property on that street, and then they'll work back from that. And so they'll say either that was a better property or that wasn't as good as condition as this property, and they'll apply, a kind of a value based on that. But if you're not going to go substantially above that. Like if a property is earning, 3,000 next door and you're earning 6,000, you're not going to be looking at a doubling of value, because people will know that if this was put on the market for sale, the likelihood is that it's going to be a family buying it to move into as their permanent residence, and therefore they don't care about the fact that it's possible to earn 6,000 a month. They just want a home, and so they're going to pay the market price for a home in that area. So compare that though to a buy-to-let. Like if you're an investor and you're thinking about making money as an investor buying property, like obviously, leaving aside the fact that you haven't increased the value, having that substantial cash flow is very beneficial. And it means that you can pay down your debt much quicker. It means that you can accumulate, a pile of cash much quicker. And obviously, if you have that pile of cash, then you can apply it into a new deal or whatever. Now, so why isn't everyone piling into HMOs? Well, there's a couple of reasons why. And the first risk that I always warn people about is that, first of all, the fact that it's currently not regulated does not mean that will always be the case. And so you do need to be careful that this will eventually be regulated. And maybe the way that you've divided up your house is no longer in compliance. You might have some rooms that are just too small according to the rules that they may eventually bring in. I'm actually in the process of organizing a guest who's going to come on the podcast soon. And I was just speaking with him yesterday and we were talking about this. He's based in the UK and he's done a lot of HMO conversions, so he knows all the rules and stuff. So I'm going to bring him on board. We're going to talk about the rules and the sizing and all that kind of stuff. But just to get back to the immediate thing, if you're thinking about doing this, something you need to be careful of is the bills, okay? The pros and cons of the HMO is that you can get lots of money per rent from all the individuals. But the way it works is that the landlord covers the utility bills. The utility bills stay in the landlord's name. And so your gas, your electricity, all of this case, that all comes in and it's your responsibility to pay it. And what often happens in a situation where you are not paying the bill yourself, what happens? Well, people abuse it. And so I know people in the program that are involved in this stuff will say that they'll call over to the house and they'll find that they walk in and everyone's walking around in a t-shirt, the heat is on full blast, and yet the windows are all wide open and the doors are all open to get, because they're too hot. And so nobody is thinking about the bills because they're not paying them. And these bills can be very substantial for the landlord. So you've got to be really careful about that. Now, some of my clients have had, nightmare stories where, it's costing like $2,000 a month or something like that for the bills. And so that is obviously something that, would remove any profitability from the project. And I know some of the clients that I have are very smart and they've actually plumbed their heating system a certain way so that you can actually, that's not possible, that it will actually shut off the system because of sensors that pick up the fact that windows are open and all this kind of stuff. But it is costly and it's something that you need to be careful about. So I would suggest if you're looking at that, just think through the wiring and the plumbing of the house and make sure that there is some smart systems there so that if somebody goes out for the whole day and leaves their room unattended, that the heat is not on in the room blasting for the whole day, that there is some sort of a sensor that would kick that off. And you got to be careful and think this thing through, or it's going to cost you a fortune. Those regulations that we're talking about there about the UK and the difference and stuff like that, what's happened before, if you go back to, I think it was 1987, and it was around about the time that I was starting to look at studying architecture and stuff. And that was when they did away with what was called the bylaws, and they introduced the Irish planning regulations. And the planning regulations, it was the first time they did it back in 1987, and they brought in these things, and rather than write hundreds of pages of regulations, what they simply did was take the UK regulations and just put a harp on the front, like bang, that's it. That's the Irish regulations. And so it was essentially the British or the UK regulations and just brought in and dusted off and turned into the Irish regulations with almost no changes at all. Now, over time then, they would have updated the regulations and they would have made, they would have noted certain things that they don't like, and they would have made changes. And so over time, this evolved and changed and stuff like that. And nowadays, they might be very, very different to the way they were once. But that is how it was done back in the day. And so the likelihood is, if they do decide to come in with regulations around HMOs and stuff, probably the UK market is the nearest market that they're probably going to go to take those regulations and to use them as some sort of a template. And so have a think about that. This is not without risk. In the same way Airbnb was initially unrestricted, and you can go, and people were making a fortune renting out their apartments in the centre of Dublin as an Airbnb. Now all of a sudden there's all these restrictions on it, and I believe that the local authority are actually going out there and they're letting on to be a tenant, and they're renting the property, and then they show up and next minute you're in deep trouble. I have heard that. So you have to be careful of that potential for disruption. And so what I've been advising people to do is basically take the UK regulations and just design around them. Make sure that your room sizes are approximately the same as the ones in the UK. And that way the likelihood is that you're not going to be far off in terms of your room sizing, and you're not going to be too far off the regulations if they do come in, when they do come in. Of course, it could be years from now before that happens, but you don't want a situation where suddenly your property that's been very profitable for many years is suddenly completely out of compliance, and you have to remove everyone from it and go and do a big refurbishment in order to do that. And I'm going to finish up here and just talk about insurance, because obviously with a lot more people coming and going in a property, the insurance is something you need to be careful about. And health and safety is very, very important when it comes to properties, and any kind of shortcuts that you take. Now, people, I get it. People are tight for cash and they need to kind of, watch every penny. But when it comes to health and safety, it is actually a criminal matter. If anything goes wrong, it is not a civil matter, it's a criminal matter. And so if you own a property and you did something to the property, and health and safety, some event took place, like maybe a fire or something like that, and somebody got hurt or worse, you could find yourself in a criminal charge, with a criminal charge for this. And so you got to be very, very careful. So things like they're not just going to slap a fine on you. You could actually find that there's a custodial sentence, and so that's not something you want to play around with. So the guys that I'm talking about, they put proper fire alarm systems in. Some of them have even gone and put in proper commercial systems that are, so every single room is monitored separately, and all of that kind of stuff. And it does cost a lot more to do that, but it is worth it just for the peace of mind. And I know, the bigger you go, some people are going as large as, we say, 9-bedroom HMO. And that's a lot of people living under one roof. All it takes is for somebody to be having a sneaky cigarette in their room or something, and they fall asleep, and next minute, the bed goes up on fire. That spreads very quickly. And so you really do need to make sure that you've got all the systems in place. And the one thing I would say about the insurance situation is that if you have gone and bought a property and you've got insurance on it as a buy-to-let, and now you're using it as a HMO and you've got 9 people living in it or something like that, it goes without saying that you're running the risk, if you have not informed your insurance company that that's how it's being used, there is a strong possibility that when something bad happens, that your policy will be null and void. So you got to make sure that you're advising them that this extra intensification of the use is happening. Otherwise, there's no point in having insurance. You may as well just run the risk. And I can remember, if I go back to the 1990s or early 2000s, I remember I had this lady working for me, this Chinese lady. She was a housekeeper. She used to come in, and she also helped with the kids and things like that. And I can remember she asked me, could she rent my apartment that I had? And I was delighted to help her because she was working for us and she was looking after the kids and stuff. So I gave her this property, and I gave her at a very good rate. I think I was maybe charging her $600 a month or $500 a month, and it was for a nice apartment in the centre of Dublin. And I can remember popping in to collect the rent one time and finding that there was about 6 people sleeping in this 1-bedroom apartment. And I can remember just kind of thinking, oh my God, what is going on here? And they had turned this into a business, and they were paying me $500, But for all I know, they were getting 500 a month from all 6 of these guys, and they were, big money being made. And we talked about the wear and tear, and I can remember going over to the cooker, and there was this huge big pot of rice being boiled, and the cooking, the hood, the hood that sits over the cooker, that just wasn't able to cope with the amount of steam and smoke coming off it. And I can remember putting my hand up above the press, and there was a thick layer of vegetable oil fat. It was kind of like maybe an inch thick. And I can remember thinking to myself, like, if there was a spark and this was to catch fire, like, this would be an inferno. And so that is the thing you need to worry about when you're into these properties that are getting really highly intensive use. And so be very, very careful about that. So guys, this is the end of part 1. I have more to tell you on this, but it's going to be a long one if I keep on going. And so right now, let's bring it to an end, and let's have next week's episode, part 2. Talk to you then. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you enjoyed the show or found it in any way useful, could I please ask you to take a moment to leave a review over on iTunes or Spotify? This really helps us get the podcast out in front of more people. If you have any questions or topics you would like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via my brand new school community. You will find a link in the show notes. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the projects I'm working on by signing up for my weekly newsletter over on my website, gavinjgallagher.com. That's all for now. See you back here, same time next week.